What's up, folks? Welcome back to another edition of SHU Outdoors. My name is Mick. I'm your host, and today I want to tell you what it was like to live in an abandoned building in the North Bronx that was like haunted as a day is long. My good friend here, Spike Polite from the band Sewage out of New York City, put me on to the squat, him and another punk rocker by the name of Cronus. Unfortunately, Cronus has been long deceased, but I want to give him a shout out, because he was a really cool guy. Back to the story, right? So Spike Polite and Cronus, we met on the Lower East Side. I'm going to say in like 1989, 1990, 1991, somewhere around that time frame when the Lower East Side was still like the Lower East Side before it became gentrified, abandoned buildings and all kind of mayhem and chaos was going on down there. And obviously I was homeless. This is decades ago, and Spike and Cronus were also homeless, but they had been in the city a while longer than me, and they had already mapped out a couple of squats, and they're kind of the ones who put me on to squatting. And we're going to get into this story, and it was just interesting, and I just thought it'd be a cool story to tell on this channel. Can you believe it, guys? Only 20% of my viewers are subscribed. It would tremendously help this channel out a whole bunch if you could take the time to pick the remote up and hit that like and subscribe button. So let me paint you a picture, right? So at that time, in the late 80s, early 90s, the Lower East Side in the city was a totally different New York City than it is today. I hear a lot of people talking about, the city's done gone wild and whatnot. The truth of the matter is, the real truth, that New York City is probably safer now than it's been in the last 2 or 3 decades, as far as everything being cool. And of course there's crime. It's a huge city, but compared to what it used to be, I say it's 10 times safer than it used to be 25, 30, 35, 40 years ago. For sure. That's just one man's opinion. So I say that to say this whole story occurred around, just for a good time stamp, about 1990. I met Spike and Cronus, and our paths crossed to the Lower East Side, because way back then I really wasn't that familiar with New York City. I guess it hadn't become my adopted hometown yet. It was just somewhere that I was kind of like passing through. I really liked it. It was my kind of city, and one thing led to another, and I just ended up staying there for like a lifetime. Off and on, I went to prison, during the course of me being in New York City all those years, and ended up doing about 25 years in prison, all told. But anyway, back to the story. So Spike and Cronus was like, yo, man, you out on the street? Because it was wintertime. I was like, yeah, man, I'm out on the street. They said, yo, we got a spot up in the Bronx, man, but it's all the way in the North Bronx, about like 225th Street on White Plains Road. That's about as far up as you can go into Bronx. About 8 or 10 or 12 more blocks, you'd be in what is called Yonkers. Yonkers, New York, which is Westchester County, borders right there where the Bronx is. If you keep going, the last stop is literally about, you get off on 224th Street, 25th Street. So the years have blurred some of the details, but you get off on 224th, 25th Street. It was a 2 train. So you used to catch it. I used to catch the train. We used to catch the train at 14th Street, catch the 2 train, ride it all the way up. It'd take about an hour to get to that squat, right? But it was real cool. Now, at that time, that neighborhood around 225th Street was primarily a Jamaican neighborhood, and that was actually pretty cool. I mean, they never messed with us, and we had a whole nest of punk rockers and squatters, and we'd be going in with Liberty spikes, and it was a pretty wild experience, right? And this building was so haunted and so full of whatever kind of spirits lived there. A couple of notable incidents happened to me while I lived there, and I'm just going to get into a couple, right? This building, we used to have an AM/FM radio, so when we were up there squatting, that's far removed from our stomping grounds. Now, it's still a hood neighborhood, or it was back then. I would consider it the hood, but it really wasn't our scene, but we had a cool squat up there. So we would get on the train, ride all the way up there, hang out there 2 or 3 days, recharge our batteries, do what we needed to do, hill up or whatever, because we used to routinely go to punk rock shows and get in fights and whatever we would do, It was a wild time. And you would have to take batteries when you went up there, all right? Because it did not matter how many batteries, how new they were. When you took a battery into that squat and you put it you put it in the radio, you could turn the radio on, it would play fine and dandy. And it wasn't just one radio either, it was several radios over the years. But if you turn that radio off, when you turned it back on, it would be dead as a doornail. The batteries would be empty. So whatever was living there, it was like hungry for energy, right? And that did happen. Now, as the years went by, I stayed up there off and on for I'm going to say about 10 years, right? And I had a little room up there. In fact, another good friend of mine by the name of Japa, I've kind of lost touch with her, but she's from Brazil. She did a whole documentary on me. It's true, man. She got me in her, and I'm sure I'm not a part of it anymore, but Japa had got me into the Screen Guild or something like that in New York, because she did a documentary and it was so intense, right, that she had to go hire some professional actors in order for them to work with me. I had to be a part of that union too, and I'm sure I'm not a part of it anymore, but yeah, that did happen. I don't know whatever happened to the footage. She got out of college and went back to Brazil, and we were in contact a little bit. Then all of a sudden, I didn't hear from her no more. I hope she's doing well, and that is some of the coolest, most classical footage there is, because I was always in it, because she was kind of doing it about me to a degree. I don't know, but we would go around and do punk rock shows, and she'd film me in the pit, interview me. She came to the squat with me. It was just really cool classical footage. Another thing about that building, right? 2 things happened. Now, after I had been living there for about 5 or 6 or 7 years, what I would do is I'd take a big saucer, right? Because this was hardcore squatting. In the winter, we would heat with rubbing alcohol. We'd get, you get like a 5. You can get one of them big old industrial bean or corn cans out of schools use them and all kind of stuff. They're like a gallon can or something. And you can put sand and rocks in there, put it on a couple of bricks, right? Pour a whole can of rubbing alcohol in there and set it on fire. It burns clean. You can heat a room up very well if you got it sealed. All right. So during this whole time, I really got into urban survival, survivalism also, and so we had a nightstand by my bed, because I had eventually kind of hooked my little room up a little bit. Spike Cronus passed away, and Spike ended up getting a lady friend and moved down on the Lower East Side with her. So me and other people kept the fight alive for that squat, right? And we didn't have any problems, so it wasn't like keeping the fight alive. We just ended up staying up there much, much longer, and I think Spike and Cronus had a big fight up there one time, but that's their story to tell, not mine, right? So Spike's a cool guy, man. If you don't know about him, you should go check him out on Punk Rock Forever. He's got an internet radio show. It's called Sewage. I mean, he's the real deal. He's a real punk rocker. So if you guys never heard of him, he's out of New York City. Ton of music. really a cool guy, a really dear friend of mine, you know. And I just wanted to put him in the background, man, because he's a cool guy. And Jeff is he's married to a good friend of me and my wife's. And I think the other lady's his lady friend. I usually don't do this for people, but I'm going to do it for Spike because he's a cool guy, man. Super huge love for the guy. So you take, like, I had a nightstand next to my bed, and I had a big saucer on it, and I would put a big candle in it, so that way I could heat. You know, I could, excuse me, not heat, but that way I could, put a candle in it and have some light when the sun went down. You know what I mean? So one night, and I used to take care. I used to make sure that there was no debris around this saucer. You know what I mean? Because I knew there was an open flame in it. But in an abandoned building, even if it's sealed up and you got a little security, you still want to be able to see if you open your eyes. You know what I mean? And you couldn't have a flashlight up there, like I said, because if you took a battery up there, it would drain immediately. All right. Now, what I used to do is I used to stop at the corner store, and I used to get in the wintertime, get 4 or 5 things of rubbing alcohol and 1 pack of batteries. Because as long as you kept the radio on, it played. But if you turn that radio off, even for a second, and turn it back on, the battery's dead as a doornail. And this wasn't just one incident. This happened like hundreds of times. So I already knew, okay, I got a radio. I had one of them little cheap AM, FM radios back in the day with a little speaker on it, you know. And you could, you know, it had some rock and roll stations and talk radio and stuff like that. This was before technology, you know. It was before everybody had a phone, you know. So we was living in like a different flow, you know. So I had the AM, FM radio, so I had to keep that little candle because if you had a flashlight, as soon as you took the battery in there, it would drain. You know what I mean? So that was kind of useless. So always kept 2 or 3 big candles, you know, that I could put it in the middle of that saucer and light it, and it would keep light. And if it was wintertime, throw some rubbing alcohol in that little bucket we had right there in the middle of the floor, light it up. And, you know, it would warm a space. You might have to burn 2 or 3 bottles. A bottle would last about 5 or 6 minutes. It would go out, but it would, in the process of it burning, not only did it heat the room that was sealed up, the can would get hot and, you know, radiate heat. It helped out a lot, even in the most brutal winters. I squatted in that building off and on for about 10 years. In between going to jail or whatever, I'd get out, I'd go back to that squat because I had a little spot up there. It was in the cut, nobody knew about it. So one night I wake up and the whole nightstand's on fire, man. And I took great pain to make sure there was no debris. So I said, okay, maybe I did leave some debris there. I put it out, cleaned it up, and, you know, I chalked it up as, okay, well, I probably did leave debris around. This time I'll be super, super duper extra careful. I was just extra careful before. Maybe if I step it up to super duper extra careful, this will happen again. So a few months goes by, and it happened again, you know. And, you know, it kind of sent like a chill. At that time, man, I was so out in the street, I wasn't even worried about ghosts. But we all knew the place was haunted, but I didn't really care. You know what I mean? And I never saw no ghosts, quote unquote. But you could just feel energy in the place, man. And we had rooms on the, we had put, because the 3rd floor was still in good shape. The 2nd, 3rd, the basement, the 2nd, 3rd floor, it was all like, you know, open air, windows busted out. But on the 3rd and 4th floor, there was a few rooms that still had windows in them. You could seal the doorways up and heat it. You know, you could make do. I ain't saying it was classy living, but it kept you out of the streets, you know. This is for all the men and women that are still locked down in cold, dark, lonely places. You're down, but you're not forgotten because Big Mick Dog says so. So after the 2nd time that happened, and I ended up moving on from there, but that was definitely one of the most haunted dwellings that I've ever been in. And I lived there like off and on. Periodically, I squatted there off and on for like 8 or 10 years. Looking back on those wild times in my life, I was like, how'd you make it through that? And then going through Rikers Island and coming right back to the streets. I was a tough kid, I guess. Maybe tougher than I realized that I was. But I figured, what the heck, man? I put a video out, flood the algorithm with either really good content or at least semi-good content. Just shoot the breeze with my audience a lot of times. Even if I don't have one topic that I'm going to zero in, I still like to make a video and shoot the breeze. And on a closing note, another story I wanted to tell about that squat, right? Before I move on, right? Now, this building was about 2 blocks away from the 2 train. Now, when you leave out of Manhattan, a lot of times, most of the trains, especially up in the Bronx, they become elevated. So once you get into the Bronx, after you go 8 or 10 or 15 blocks, the trains come up, and now they're elevated. So on the way up there, you would see the whole Bronx because the train's elevated. So you're on the train for about 40 minutes when you hit the Bronx, maybe 35 minutes when you hit the Bronx, going to all these train stops, and then it gets to 225th Street, and you would get off, walk a couple of blocks. It was a little in and out, you had to kind of know how to get to it. You'd walk a couple of blocks, but the neighborhood was primarily Jamaican. And this is like kind of wild, but it's the truth. There was a Jamaican African-American church, all right across the street. So the abandoned building had a parking lot, and it had an abandoned building with a parking lot, all right? And there was a fence around the parking lot. That parking lot belonged to the Jamaican church, right? And the church was a nice little church, but a little hood, but a nice church across the street on the corner, right? More than one time, all the black folks would be out there ready to go to church with their Sunday best on, and we done been downtown all night long raising hell and doing whatever we were doing, and we would come dragging in like at 7:30, 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning, right? And they'd have the parking lot open, and all their cars would be in there, and it was like a church. They'd get ready to go into the church, right? Man, we would come through, walk through the parking lot. Hey, how you guys doing? Right? And nobody never messed with us. They were super cool about it, man. And there was a little fence, and you had to jump the little fence when you got to the building. You would jump the little fence over to a concrete pad, and then there was a window, but there wasn't no window in it. And that's how we would jump and get in. I would say 2-3 times, right? That happened over the course of years, because we would try not to interrupt them. But a couple of times it just happened, right? They never called the police on us. They never gave us a problem. They knew that we were a bunch of crusty punk rockers, because sometimes it might be 2 or 3 of us, and sometimes we might bring 5 or 6 or 7 people up there. You know what I mean? It was a squat, man. It's for kids who are a little down and out on their luck, but they're still trying to do better. That's what it's all about. Each one helps one. Each one teaches one. So that's what it was about. I remember one time we came through there, man, and it was a bunch of gnarly punks too, right? Liberty Spikes, the whole works, studs, spikes, dudes and chicks, right? And we came through there. It was a Sunday morning. It must have been 8, I don't know, quite a number of us. And the black folks was just looking at us, right? And we were like, hey, guys, what's up? We were real cool about it. Jumped the little fence, went in, went up, kicked back, chilled, no problems, and obviously we would never mess with their vehicles, you know what I mean? And they never messed with us, man. It was just a super cool scene, You know, on a closing note, right, to this video, I live in Volusia County, Florida, right? And it's bike week. And I got a bike, man. I ride. But I don't even go over there no more. It's not because Daytona's not a cool city. And it's not because there's a lot of cool stuff going over there. But like if you go over there in bike weeks, there's just too many cops, man. Don't misunderstand me, man. I'm not saying you shouldn't have a few cops and people definitely shouldn't drive drunk and all that. Count me in on the no driving drunk. I do not drive intoxicated. I think it's one of the most scumbag things anybody could do, because it's not only about your life, it's about everybody else's life on the roadway. But you go over there, man, and it's like they're looking for any little code infraction, any reason to pull you over and hassle you, give you a ticket, man. And, I mean, I just don't get it. You know, like, why would you go out of your way to destroy one of your biggest revenue streams that you have in Volusia County, Florida, man? You know, I don't live in Daytona Beach. You know, I live far out in the country part of Volusia County. But I ain't no worried about nobody doxing me, homeboy, in case you get any ideas. I live in motherfucking Florida, bro. Okay, we got to stand your ground down here. You know what I mean? And I ain't tripping on it anyway. But I'm just saying, I wouldn't give anybody pinpoint myself. But yeah, I live, and I don't even go to bike week. You know what I mean? Like, it's not enjoyable. I think, this is what I think about Florida, you know. I've been living in Florida now for about 4 years. It's my home, and I'm probably going to live down here the rest of my life. It doesn't mean I won't travel and go to other places and see other things, but this will be my home, no doubt, for the rest of my life. Beautiful state. Beautiful beaches. Beautiful palm trees. It's just a beautiful state, man. Cool in so many ways. But the one thing that is not cool about Florida, all right, and I'm not trying to offend anyone, but I'm telling the truth as I see it. You got too many scumbag politician Bible thumpers, whatever they got going on up in Tallahassee in the Capitol building. I'm not talking about Tallahassee as a city. I'm just saying in the Capitol building of Florida, right? It's like they go out of their way to pass the most whack laws they could pass. You know, law and order. Don't get me wrong, man. I'm not anti-jail if somebody's a danger to society and the jail is the only place where society can be safe. But I definitely don't approve of just locking everybody up for every little nitpick thing. You know, in order to consume marijuana legally in Florida, I got to go to the doctor. I got to get a card. I got to go through all kind of trials and tribulations to be able to purchase it legally and consume it legally, which I do comply with that law. But the point is, why not just make it recreational, man? Am I really hurting anyone in the state of Florida when I do this? Am I hurting you, John Q. Citizen? Does this hurt you? Okay. You like to have a few beers after work. I'm not a big drinker. I like to smoke a little weed now and then. Okay, you consume alcohol responsibly. I consume marijuana responsibly. I'm a goddamn grown man. All right? And they've started to use Daytona Bike Week as like a revenue gathering organization. The cops want to write 1,000 tickets for any little infraction. It's one of their few remaining huge revenues. They also got a big NASCAR track down here in Volusia County, over there in by Daytona. You ran off spring break, okay? Maybe people don't understand who live in Florida, all right? And no disrespect intended. People work all year long. And they're a little cold, brutal, northeast town, all right? Save their money, come to Florida to have a good time, not to be hassled by the popo, okay? People ride their bike or trailer their bike for 1,000 or more miles quite often to come to Bike Week. And when they come down here and they're having a good time, for you to go out of your way And word's getting out. Now I'm going to tell you, this is what I've noticed. Usually, for all the other prior bike weeks I've been down here for, I mean, I live about, a quarter of a mile or so from a pretty major highway, right? And you used to hear motorcycles going up and down the roadway all the time. This is the second day of Bike Week 2026. Not anymore. Okay? By this time, the other years that I had been here, man, you just hear motorcycles all day, every day, riding up and down the road out here. Now, it could pick up, because it's relatively early into the week. But I just think a lot of people are going to get really turned off, and you're going to lose that revenue stream also. People used to cry about the spring breakers. If you made $50 million in one weekend, and it cost you $100,000 to clean the beach up, that's a net profit of $49 million plus dollars. Why would you live on the strip in Daytona Beach if you got a problem with noise? Volusia County is a huge county. Let help people live there. People who want to cater to the tourists, who come down here and spend their money and support the state of Florida and the economy. Now you're going to mess around and drive Bike Week off. As soon as another city starts really jumping with it, a lot of people is going to go there, especially if they make it the same time of year as your Bike Week, and tell you, hey, if you come here, you won't be hassled by the popo on every street corner looking to write every $50 or $100 ticket they can write, confiscate people's bikes, all kind of nonsense. I got a motorcycle again, and I do not go into Daytona for Bike Week. It is not a pleasurable experience. Not because of the city itself. Super cool city, man. Super beautiful beach, palm trees, all the above, man. But nobody wants to be hassled by the popo. And don't get me wrong. Again, I'm going to say this so the Johnny Law and Order types don't, start hitting me up in the comments. I'm not saying that you don't need popos. Okay, I get it. But the popo's job is not to be a revenue collector for the fucking state or the county. Job is to protect the public and enforce the law. Well, we are enforcing the law. That going to your mirror with 1 center off of whatever it's a P, and that's a $200 ticket. You know what I say to those law enforcement officers? Fuck off, okay? Okay, I understand the need for police to go out and round up menaces to society. I get it. But when you've made it your business and your job to collect revenue from the people who come to your state and boost your economy and want to have a good time. They want to drink a beer. They want to smoke a joint. They want to walk on the beach. They don't want to be hassled by the popo, man. That's the reason why your tourism industry has fell off by leaps and bounds. You pass laws that make people feel uncomfortable. They're like, hey, I don't want to go in there and spend my money if this is what these people really believe. I don't care, man, about any of the bull crap. I want to have a good time. If you're cool, you're cool. If you're not cool, you're not cool, man. That's just the way I see it. Well, look, I just wanted to bring you guys this video. Shout you out. Spike Polite is doing an interview with this gentleman about G.G. Allen. Highly recommend you go check his channel out. Really cool guy, like I said, to this day, a pretty doggone good friend of mine. G.G. Allen. Saw him play several times live in New York City. Well, until next time, stay up. Peace.